So this is a foreword to the Dura spriting guide. So I'll start with what it is philosophically. The purpose of this guide is to prove to you that if you want to, with relative ease and simplicity, you can actually, as a total beginner, start spriting for Dura and you can get something into the game. You can sprite, create some sprites, create some artwork, create some graphic arts, and it can go right into the game. That is the purpose of this guide. It's to prove that to you. Now, what is it in practicals? The way we do that is we break down in the guide the fundamental principles of how Dura's art direction is achieved, okay, in practice. And if you want to think of each one of these things that we're going to talk about in the guide as a checkbox, if you, when you go to Sprite, if every time you're doing a sprite, you make sure that you're just following, you're abiding each one of these principles that we lay out here, then it will be hard for you not to come up with a sprite of your own creation that will fit Dura and can go right into the game. And so that is what this guide is about. It really is that simple. We're trying to demonstrate and show to you that you can do this if you have the enthusiasm, if you have the interest, um, and that all you must do is adhere to these principles, checkbox them, and again, it will be hard for you to come up with sprites that don't fit. And that's everything. Okay, so this is Dura's spriting guide. This is part one of the guide. This guide, its goal is to teach anyone willing to willing and wanting to learn how to most efficiently and most simply create the artwork and the graphic art for Dura. And the goal is to teach you in such a way that it is going to be as easy, as efficient, and as simple as possible. And this part encompasses tangibles and or practicals. So the practicals of actually making a sprite. Uh, Disclosure is I myself, I'm Eris, by the way. I'm not a spriter. I don't sprite for Dura almost ever, but very rarely. So there are even more qualified people that can get into the details of this. But I do have a very good hold on the actual art direction and the style that Dura uses and how that style is achieved. So that's what this guide's going to be about. To begin, intro is over. Um, so the first thing to do a sprite is your canvas. And another thing, this guide will definitely have extremely useful stuff for people that are not just beginners. However, it is intended to be a inclusive or an encompassing guide for beginners. Um, so uh, some of this stuff will be obvious for people, but we're going to cover everything because for a person that's truly starting, he doesn't know how everything works. So we are going to cover everything. Okay, now truly the intro is over. So to begin part one, the first thing is canvas. Canvas is the actual background of your image. Now, Dura runs on 32 by 32 images. That's how it's compartmentalized. So, for example, if I'm actually here, everywhere in this game, in Dura, what I'm standing on is a 32 by 32. This is a 32 by 32. This mug of beer is 32 by 32. This brown flask of beer is 32 by 2. This ham is 32 by 32. Possibly a better way to exemplify it is if you go to something like the depot. Every square in the game is 32 by 32. So that's how the game operates. So a canvas size is the background is the base size of the image, and all base sizes for your purposes will always be 32 by 32. Always. And you can see that if you fill in all the pixels, you get 32 by 32. But the point is, that's how big your actual canvas is. That's what you're working with. Every image is 32 by 32. It is never 31 by 31. It is never 33 by 31. It is never anything else. It is 32 by 32. Okay? Um, The second thing is a piece of advice. Do not try to draw images on a black background. Do not do it. You will understand later in the guide why. Do not try to draw images on a black or a very dark background. Typically, recommendation is white. Um, if not white, then some sort of bright color. That's how you want to draw on. Okay, moving along right away. So 32 by 32. Mhm. So the first now getting back to this intro, this beginner stuff. So first thing to talk about is something called black outline. So the way Dura works, um, it's a simple concept. Within the game world, there is a foreground and there is a background. Um, so, for example, even right here, there is a foreground and a background. The background of the game exists on the tiles, the ground. In this case, it also exists on the walls. It exists on part of this counter. Uh, that is your background. Your foreground is all the objects that are overlaid on that background. So this wastebasket, this coal basin, this NPC, and my character God 5. Okay, now this is an extremely important point, and I'm going to go a little further. For example, these bowls are in the foreground, while this ground that is under this chair, for example, or under my character is in the background. Same thing, if I put an item on the ground, this is in the foreground. Now, the reason I am bringing this up is because fundamentally, what we're talking about, well, the subject is black outline. Fundamentally, the way we control foreground and background is a black outline. Okay, more or less anything in the game that is in the background or you want to be in the background is going to have no black outline. So in this case, we have tiles, ground tiles, various types. They do not have a black outline. Same as the walls. They do not have a black outline. What that does is it allows it to blend in with the environment a lot easier. Okay? And by blending in the environment, your eyes are not going to be drawn to it and it becomes part of the background. Another way of thinking about this is that it is a non-interruption sprite. Okay? And this is, partially courtesy of ZMaster here. It is a non-interruption sprite. So, right. So, if I am in the game, for example, at Emperor Cruzak right here, perfect example, there's no black outline on any of these tiles. So they blend and become part of the background, and anything that is superimposed on them has a black outline. Okay? And that makes them pop, draws the eye, gives foreground. Um, so what I was trying to say is interruption. If you were to put a black outline around these tiles, it would interrupt everything, and your eyes would be drawn to it. That is why walls and tiles or ground does not have a black outline. So a black outline is fundamental to Dur's art direction. It's also universal, and uh, it is just one of the core parameters that if you abide, it's extremely easy to kind of not miss with getting a sprite right. So for example, over here you have items. Now, every one of these items has a black outline. Okay, it doesn't matter what item is here: shovel, bottle, candle, ring, book. Sign has a little bit less, but it still overall does obey a black outline principle. Same with the candelabrum, same with this bucket, same with this crate, same with these drawers, and really just all these items. They all have a black outline. And when superimposed on the ground, the background of the world, it makes it pop and it makes it grab. So it is an extremely simple thing, but I suppose I haven't made the practical takeaway here yet, which is that when you are spriting, if you want to sprite grounds, if you want to create grounds or walls, or a non-interruption sprite or a background sprite, you do not want to use a black outline. Okay, but if your goal is to do any other type of sprite, so a foreground sprite, an interruption sprite, usually sprites that you can pick up, any type of sprite you can pick up, including equipment pieces, or even things that are in the background, or excuse me, that are in the world that you want to pop out from the background. So you want a rock to pop out, there it is. If you want a rock to pop out, okay, in this case you use a black outline. So that is the first order of business when it comes to creating sprite. You should always have a black outline unless you're creating something that's more like a ground or a wall. And I'm going to prove it to you now with a video example. So, dude, that's funny. Okay, so I don't know if you've caught on yet, but yeah, this is a different world than what you're used to. So what we have here is, this is Frodo's hut, okay, and we have all the normal stuff. We have the chairs, we have the tables with the candelabrums, and you probably don't ever think about it, but you have a background here and you have a foreground, okay? And the way that's largely being controlled is black outline. And you'll notice things that don't have black outline are the cobblestone, the wooden floor, the brick wall. But things that do have a background are the chair and the stool and whatnot. Now, what we've done to help accentuate the point is give an actual, as I was saying, so all of a sudden, what happens when we take away the black outline? So we've taken the black outline away for clearly what you can see on the screen. So these chairs, this chair, this table stool, um, this meat, and these candelabrum, and this jug. Also this flower right here, this honey flower. Now you can see a night and day difference. When things have a black outline, they pop. You're drawn to them. They give the world a sense, they give the item a sense of presence, a sense of immediacy that you're trying to differentiate, okay, from, say, the background. You want the eye drawn to it. So when you take that away, it is insane how much it just changes things. Particularly, again, you do not notice things. Um, I mean, if I were actually walking through here, this pops and catches my. These three do, and it's almost like I don't even see these things. And it's similar with here. I mean, I have to. It's almost like I have to bring my eyes purposely to here to see this. So this is how much of a difference a black outline makes. And it is similar if you go up here, where I've inversed it, where all of a sudden for these non-interruption sprites, these background sprites, that if they give them a black outline, I mean, they jump to you like crazy. Same thing with this wall over here. And so it's really that simple. That is what you need to know about black outline. The next thing to talk about is direct perspective versus height perspective. So for that, that's relatively simple as well. So direct perspective um, is another way of saying something. It looks flat, or something looks that you are looking at it directly straight on or directly from above. So, and versus a heightened perspective, which is during perspective, it's height perspective, and that is the right column. So right column is going to have height, and left column is going to be direct perspective. So height perspective and direct perspective on the left. Now what you can see is, you probably can tell very easily. A direct perspective, again, is something you look at straight on. So this shovel, this bottle, this candle, this ring, this book, this bag, this backpack, fish, goes on and on. The robe, it is, you're looking at it dead on. And so the items that have direct perspective, I mean, it's ultimately a choice, but it really is simple. Items that have direct perspective are typically items that just don't have height. It's not something they're doing. It's something that they're just not doing. So if an item doesn't really necessitate height, then you don't have a height perspective and you have a direct perspective. It's pretty simple. If an item by its nature has some height to it, then it's going to take the form of height perspective. So it really is this simple. I mean, if you look at black outline, it's pretty much, does it have a black line or does it not have a black line? And that does a massive impact on what it ultimately does in the world. It's the same with perspective. You either have a direct perspective or you have pretty much the exact same type of height perspective. Okay? You can clearly see a wardrobe It's not flat, it has a perspective. Same with this crate, same with this bucket, the jar, the drawers, the barrel, the parcel, the trough. I mean, it just goes on and on. This horse, this globe, um, this pot, this chair, they all have height perspective. And they're not a different perspective. They're all using mm, the same degrees of perspective. So we're going to get into that now. Just okay, let's do it like that. So this is going off ZMaster, and talking about perspective, I mean, we can literally read together. I will quote from him. While most things without appreciable height, such as equipment, can be drawn looking directly above it, as if it were placed on the ground, this doesn't work with things that have a noticeable height. So he's talking about, you know, direct perspective if things don't have height. If things have height, they have a noticeable height, then you have to use heightened perspective. So to draw such objects, you have to understand Tibian perspective, because obviously this is based on the game of Tibia. It's a precursor. So analyzing the crate in game, and as I've said in the past, Tibia's precursor is Ultima Online. Tibia pulls literally its sprites from Ultima, carbon copy, identical, like literally took them. So analyzing crate in a game is a good way to learn about it, about what perspective is. The crate is a perfect cube with height, width, and length all equal. Right away, you notice that the view is from above, just like the objects with little height. The length and width are still drawn in the plane of the screen, but the height is drawn at 45 degrees. Look at one of the vertical edges to see this more clearly. Also notice that the southward facing side is drawn as a rhombus, not a square. So there's a little bit to unpack there, but what you need to understand is direct perspective has no perspective. It's dead on. Okay, you're directly over top of it or looking at it. Duran perspective is has a heightened perspective, and it essentially is drawn at a 45-degree angle, and it's drawn where the base is the southeast and the kind of terminus of the image is the top left, so the north west. So what he's talking about is that, if you take the crate, which is in 32 by 32, it is a perfect square right here. Okay, this is also known as a perfect cube. Okay, and this length and width are equal. Length is equal, width is equal. Height is not. And while this is a square, this is a rhombus, and this is a rhombus. Okay, now what that's telling you is that obviously we know this is a cube. Okay, so that means this is actually equal to this, but because of the perspective, this is the rhombus and this is a square. Okay, now this perspective, again, is uniform throughout all items. All items obey this same perspective. It's not like the crate is the first one to do it either. There's nothing special particularly about the crate. Every item obeys a 45-degree perspective principle. It's literally, you could think about it like there is a starting point in this corner, and it goes right through all the way to this corner, from bottom to top. So everything works like that. If you have a direct perspective, it is always flat, zero, straight on. If you have a heightened perspective in Dura, it is always a 45-degree angle, and it always obeys these same rules. It's relatively self-explanatory about how this is being achieved. It is start point here, end point here is a way to think about it. It is a 45-degree angle perspective. Um, and what else can you say? Uh, you could Another way to look at it is the top of the image is always essentially equal perspective wise, but then of course as you have the rest of the image, which is in this case going to be the front side and the eastern side, it's not going to be equal because of the perspective to the top. Okay, so, and it doesn't matter what the image is. We're using 32 by 32s, but you can see here that every single image obeys these rules, these physical rules of how Dern perspective works. They all work like this fundamentally. I mean, I bet you, I would say, I guarantee you, if I put a parcel on top of this, you can see that it's identical. Okay, you can see that it's as if it were a continuum or a continuous line. So that it's really that simple. That's perspective in a nutshell. That's all you need to understand about Duran perspective. Okay, um, you have either direct or you have heightened, and heightened always obeys these rules. Okay, always. Um, it's really that simple. Okay. Uh, and I mean, oh, it's not just for items, of course. It's also for players. Okay, players, and it's also for creatures. They also always have either a direct perspective, aka a rotworm, or they have a heightened perspective, aka a human player, or a behemoth, or a dragon. They have that perspective. Um, so hopefully you can start to see that in reality, it's just there's certain grooves that once you start working within those grooves, it's hard almost not to come up with a good sprite or a sprite that fits, that is, and that Dura could use. Okay, so the next thing is lighting. Another one that once broken down, it's pretty freaking easy. Where is this? So lighting. Here we go. So we'll start with a shovel. So what you need to understand is all lighting in Dura. Well, this isn't. Let's just say this. Universally, the rule is that lighting comes from the northwest. So lighting comes from right here. If I was in this tile, it comes from this point in the corner, the top left. That's where all light comes in Dura's world. Doesn't matter what the item is. That's where it comes from. So uh, yeah. Now it will be the case that technically speaking, the dominant of those two, it is this corner, no doubt, and I'll prove it. But the dominant, if you were to give favor to one or the other, it is the left. Light comes more from the west or the left than it does come from the north and the top. More than not when it comes to sprites that choose to kind of bend a little bit outside the standard, which is northwest. Okay, so shovel is the first example we can go to. So you can clearly see how the shading works. They have made it so the shading comes from the northwest, particularly the west. So you can see here, there is a brightness right here on this corner. That's because the light is coming from here, coming from this northwest. The left side of the shovel is much brighter, whereas the right side of the shovel is much darker. And that's because that's where the light is coming from. It is the same, not so much with the bottle. So this is good that we're starting here. So there are exceptions. It's very, very rare, but there are exceptions. So in this case, the light is actually coming from this side. Okay, that is how the shading works. But I will say again, it happens like 2% of the time. Most sprites, almost all sprites will come, including doesn't matter if it's direct perspective or heightened perspective or whatever. Most sprites will come from the northwest. Um, Candle actually, yeah, candle. It's weird because the way the candle is bent. You know what? I'm not even gonna try to explain. It's just going to confuse you. So let's go to the more standard items. So if you look at these types of items, you can clearly see that every single time the light is coming from the northwest. So I'll move this here. Um, so the light comes down on the magic plate armor. It's clearly brighter on this side, this left side, as opposed to this right side. But you can also tell that, I mean, it's hard to tell, but you can see that the darkest part is here, and there's some brightness here. Well, you can almost feel it. The light is coming from this angle. Okay. Um, it's the same with golden armor. I mean, it's going to be the same with every one of these. The light is coming here. You have a bright spot here. You have a bright spot here. You have darkness here. I mean, I'm not going to get into detail. You can see just in bulk that the light is clearly brighter on the left and the top more than it is on this right. Okay, and you have to think about in terms of shading, you do have to make that calculation where you say, well, clearly this is like, if the sun was here and this is here, this part of the armor, then the light's not going to hit it, and that's why it's dark here. You can see the same thing here. There's a little bit of difference because clearly the cape is trying to imply that it's being curved here. So if the light is from here, it might show up a little bit on the inside of the cape here, but it's not going to show up on the inside here because it's in direct it's directly blocked by the cape itself. You can see it on the strange helmet, brightness here on the top left, still some on the left, but over here, particularly top right, in counter to this, there's no light. So the light, it's always from top left, and you can see this for every single item. And so we're just going to go down, and you're going to be very quickly understand that this is more or less a universal rule. This, I think, is actually flat. So this is an older sprite, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's one way to do things. It's an acceptable part of the Dura's art direction, and it is flat. But this again reinforces the rule. Same with this. Same with this. Same with this even. This is clearly brighter than this right here. Same with this, this, and even here, you can see it. Again, it actually obeys the same principle as that cape. If you really look for it, you can see that it's doing the exact same thing. So, anyways, continuing, you can just tell that that's where light is coming from. For all, like I say, 90 to 98% of all items. And again, it doesn't matter perspective, no perspective, doesn't matter for all these other facts. It's its own independent thing. Each one of these things is, to an extent, its own independent thing. Black outline is its own independent thing. Um, and perspective is its own independent thing. And so is lighting. By the way, black outline, there's something important. We didn't talk about this. So black outline is universal for certain items, but something you don't do. You won't do this until you're a little bit more advanced. Otherwise, you just shouldn't do it. You will almost never see a black inline. Items in Dura do not have black inline. They have black outline. They do not have black inline at almost any time. It is extreme. It does happen, but it is extremely rare that you have a black inline. It doesn't happen, and it's for a bunch of reasons and yada this yada that. But for a beginner, you don't even need to think about it. But you can see that almost all items just do not have a black inline. And it would be a mistake in like I say, most situations, near all situations, to do a black inline. You just stay away from it. So that's something I forgot to mention. Okay, so moving on, you can see still, even for legs, not just armors, the light is coming from this upper left. You can see because the shade, there's no light on this inner leg right here. There's light on this outer part of this leg and the outer part of this leg. Well, I should say this outer part and this inner part, but there's not light here. And that's, again, it's because that's how light would hit. Light would hit here and light would hit here, but light would not find its way, right? It wouldn't hit here because it's blocked by here. Same thing with this. So it just keeps going like that. This is a bit different. Yeah, this is a bit different. They did it. You can still see that they're obeying the principle. The light is hitting here, and the light is hitting here. They're trying to suggest that the inside of this plate, leg, it's almost like the light is not hitting it because this is so This part is so protruding. It's definitely a little bend on the rule, but overall the rule is still maintained. This here, you could actually still see the rule is maintained where the light's coming from because it's bright here and it's dark here and the light is being blocked here, but where the shoe would push out again, the light, like, you can imagine, like, that's where the bulk of your quote unquote foot is. So that part of the shoe would push out, so of course it's catching the light. So there you go. So yeah, that's how Dura's light works. So just continuing, you can see it on these shields. Okay, just keeps going, and this is where I'd really stop. The holder shield is actually a perfect, and it's an older school shield. So it shows you where they were at where the game's art direction is in its infancy, and that is that light comes from the dead northwest, the dead top left. You can see here that it's pretty much a perfect mirror. We have the brightest part here, we have the darkest part here, and it's all on this thing. You could make the argument, there's a lot of similarities, therefore, with how the perspective and lighting works, because they both, in a sense, they're kind of there is a continuous line between this corner and this corner from bottom to top for both perspective and lighting. And then just to kind of finish off, we can see that lighting is still maintained. I mean, we have it dark here, we have it bright here, we have it bright here, dark here. Even here, you can see that there's light. This is the brightest part of the shield, arguably. No, not arguably, definitively. and this is the darkest part. Now this is an exception, okay? They did something different. It's a delta. It's not a standard. Um, the light is actually kind of coming from above. Um, Still a little bit from the left, but definitely very dominant from just top to bottom. So there are exceptions. I put these here to show you that these are flat direct perspectives, very flat sprites, and therefore there isn't really lighting going on in the standard sense. And there's nothing wrong with that. These are great sprites, frankly. Um, and lighting doesn't always need to be. What I would say is you rarely want to go against the grain, but sometimes to have an absence of light perspective is acceptable, I think. So I did want to include some stuff. So like this one, for example, this is just straight up the opposite. So it's not even just doing something different. This is the opposite. The light is actually coming from the northeast. It's well, it's not the opposite, but instead of coming from the left, it is coming from the right, although it still maintains coming from the top as well. So it, it is not universal. It's not every time, but like I say, about 95, 98% of the time, light perspective, light is coming from the northwest. Also, there is lighting applied to heightened perspective. So in the case back to the wardrobe, we can clearly see that the light is hitting from the top, but less so here and even less so here. And that's understandable if the light is coming from the northwest. Um, and you can see the same thing with the crate. It obeys this principle. It's the brightest at the top. It's a little bit less bright here. It's a lot less bright here. Same thing with the wardrobe. And you can see this with other sprites as well. I mean, I wouldn't really argue it's doing it so much here, maybe a little bit on the handle, but you can actually even see it on here. There is lighting it's creating. It's a bit odd though. I think the candles are actually coming from, like we were talking about the candle, it's coming from over here even. But most sprites, well, no, this is breaking the rule too, I'd say. Pots are weird like that. Pots are trying to show light always at this top left. So pots are weird. We can admit that. Um, Drawers, you can see it though. Box, you can see it. Barrel, you can see it. It's actually darkest right here. Keg, you can see it. Parcel, you can see it. Trough, you can see it pretty cleanly, how the light is coming from that angle. Um, and again, I think receptacles do not really obey this rule when it comes to lighting. The light, there's always light on this inner part. But the point, of course, is to show that here, you can see this clearly. The light is coming from this northwest angle right here. Um, so the idea here, again, is to show what the universal is. So there's that as well. And it's really that simple. I mean, I wouldn't say more than that. The next thing is shades. So the last thing I'll say about practical for this part is shades. So you might look at some of these sprites, or any sprites, and you might say, oh wow, that's really simple. It can be. But something that's going to save you a lot of time, okay, is understanding that most sprites in the game are actually, they have an insane amount of color grade or color gradient. Um, it's subtle, but it's very important to how the art direction is pulled off. There are exceptions, but the universal rule there's always going to be exceptions, but there's also a universal rule, and the universal rule is there's actually an insane amount of shading gradient or color gradient when it well no not color gradient shading gradient when it comes to each sprite. So I will now kind of prove it to you. So we'll start with here. So this is an Anquen tapestry sprite. This is literally every single color that's used. Okay, so to make this sprite, which is actually not a 32 by 32, so I'm cheating with you a bit, but to make this sprite, it literally has every single one of these color shades. Every single one. Okay, and I'll show you again. And don't let this frighten you because we're going to talk about it. This pan. This pan is actually comprised of this many different colors. Okay, and you can kind of see it here. You can see actually that there is a pretty insane amount of color variation within the color of brown. Okay, so if we just continue, this is the golden armor. This literally has This right here is every single color shade that the golden armor uses in its sprite. This is the mastermind shield. This is every single color it uses. Okay, and this is Medusa shield, which for my money has got to be just one of the best sprites ever created in terms of an item sprite, and it's really kind of just like I mean it's gorgeous to look at. I think. And I always forget about how good it is. But you can see, this is how many shades it is. Blue Robe, this is how many shades. It's quite a lot. Crown Legs, this is how many shades, quite a lot. Night Legs, there is an exception here, so we'll break here. So why am I, this should not cause you alarm. The reason this shouldn't cause you alarm is, so first of all, it's there so you can understand, you can save time, because one of the ways Dura's art direction is actually maintained and it does what it does, and it keeps the feeling that we all like with that the game has. Is it does have this large amount of shading gradient, um, and so it's an important thing to understand that you shouldn't be saying to yourself, "Oh, it looks so easy. I'm sure it's only like 5 or 10 colors or 5 or 10 shades." No, typically not. The way to create, you know, a level of depth and detail that you're going to want that hits the art direction correctly is you're going to use a lot of shades. Um, and that should not be daunting to you, in my opinion, because it's more, I'd rather say it's empowering because you can understand that, hey, I have a lot of tools. I'm not just limited to these 5 or 10 shades. If I wanted to make a completely monotone sprite, I have lots of options to actually get it across all the little subtleties and little details I want to get across. Okay, I have all these shades to work with that can allow me to do that. So you shouldn't think of it as a limiter. You should think of it as an empowerer. Because the other thing is, at the end of the day, this 32 by 32, you know, you had to fill in all these pixels anyways. You had to draw the whole, piece anyways. So the fact that you had to use different colors versus the same color, I mean, once you get a little bit of a hang of it, it goes very quickly. It goes very smoothly. You don't really think about it. You're just like, no, I need a lighter color. Oh, I need a darker color. Oh, I need a little bit of a change in terms like going more orange and yellow. Um, so yeah, I think we'll end there with it. Now there are exceptions. So night legs. I'll get you some others. Night legs, dwarven shield, demon helmet. You're gonna see again. There's tons of colors, but the chair has tons of colors, which I'm very happy about. But even some of the newer sprites that we have, so this is the fig. I'm gonna get all of them. The ham, and the pear, which the fig is actually I think based on. So night legs. It's also night armor. I guess was that this one? No, maybe not. So uh, hold on. Let me find night armor. No, I don't. So night armor. So you can see here there's an exception. This only uses these colors, and it's a great sprite. So it's not a universal rule, but don't think you're probably going to get away with this every time. Most sprites, at least if they have some decent amount of size, they're going to want a strong level of, they're going to probably want a larger shading gradient or shading palette than this. But I'm here to show you that it is very possible to create a great sprite with much more limitation. And it's not just night legs and night armor. You have the ham sprite. Okay, it's actually accomplished just with this. This is the whole sprite palette. And you might say, "Wow, what? How is that? That must be wrong." No, that's how ham works. It's got green in it, and it's even got purple in it. And you'll just figure out that in time. Um, and then, of course, there's the fig, which uses also a very small sprite palette, and see, there's nothing wrong with that because it's a beautiful sprite. And the pear as well, relatively small shading palette, and it's a beautiful sprite. So yeah, that covers everything. Oh, and this dwarven shield, I'm sorry, and this dwarven shield, which is an older sprite, but it's a great sprite. It's a flat sprite. It doesn't really, it doesn't really, it has a flat perspective. It doesn't have It has some lighting because frankly this is brighter over here than here, so it does obey that. But hey, it's a limited shading palette. But you can see these others, they do not do that. They go much larger. Okay, so as a conclusion, therefore, to part one, yes, we talked about black outline, we talked about canvas, we talked about uh, canvas size as well as canvas background. We talked about perspective, we talked about lighting, and we talked about um, shades, which is more like a quick tip than anything. I think, again, what I will try to reiterate and reemphasize is abiding these most fundamental parts of spriting for Dura's art direction will be surprising how hard it is to miss getting something that feels like it fits Dura simply by obeying these principles. And there's more stuff we'll talk about in the other parts, but the stuff laid out here is some of the most just important things to really uh, execute. So that's it.